You dare lay hands on your future Alpha King? The crowd gasped as my palm stung from the force of the slap I'd just delivered across Darius Blackthorn's chiseled jaw. Every wolf in the grand ceremonial hall froze, their shocked whispers echoing off the ancient stone walls. But instead of the fury I expected, instead of the punishment that should have followed such an unthinkable act of defiance, something impossible happened. The most feared Alpha King in our realm smiled. Actually smiled, and his steel-gray eyes lit up with something that looked almost like approval. "Finally," he said, his deep voice carrying across the stunned silence. "Someone with fire." I'm getting ahead of myself, though. Let me tell you how a lowly Omega servant like me ended up slapping the most powerful werewolf in North America at his own mating ceremony. My name is Elena Winters, and 3 days ago, I was nobody. Literally nobody. In the Shadow Creek Pack, Omegas like me were barely acknowledged as existing. We cleaned, we served, we kept our heads down and our mouths shut. That was the natural order, or so everyone kept telling me. I'd been working in the pack kitchen since I turned 16. 8 long years of scrubbing floors, washing dishes, and pretending I couldn't hear the cruel whispers that followed me everywhere. The orphan. The weak one. Poor little Elena, not even worthy of a mate. The whispers hurt, but I'd learned to armor my heart against them. What I couldn't armor myself against was watching injustice happen right in front of me, especially when it involved someone I cared about. That someone was Lucy Hartwell, a sweet 16-year-old Omega who'd started working in the kitchens just last month. She was everything I wasn't, bright, optimistic, still believing that good things could happen to wolves like us. Where I'd grown cynical and guarded, Lucy still saw the world through rose-colored glasses, which is exactly why she became a target for Beta Marcus Reed's unwanted attention. Marcus was the pack's head Beta, second only to our Alpha in command. He was also a predator who used his position to corner young Omega females when no one was looking. I'd managed to avoid him over the years by becoming invisible, but Lucy was too trusting, too kind to recognize the darkness behind his false smiles. 3 days ago, everything changed when the announcement came that would shake our pack to its very foundations. All pack members will attend the mating ceremony of Alpha King Darius Blackthorn. Our Alpha's voice boomed across the pack grounds through the loudspeaker system. The ceremony will be held here at Shadow Creek in 3 days' time. This is a tremendous honor for our pack. The buzz of excitement was immediate and infectious. The Alpha King, the Darius Blackthorn, was coming here. The most powerful werewolf in North America, ruler of the Northern Territories, was going to have his mating ceremony right here in our small pack. But I felt nothing but dread settling in my stomach like a cold stone. See, I knew something about Darius Blackthorn that most wolves only whispered about in dark corners. He was cursed. For 35 years he'd searched for his fated mate and found no one. Some said he was too powerful, too dominant for the moon goddess to find him a match. Others whispered darker things, that he was marked by shadow magic, that his wolf was more beast than man. The ceremony we were about to witness wasn't a joyful mating. It was a political alliance. Darius would choose a suitable female from one of the prominent families to be his queen, mate bond or no mate bond. It was a practical arrangement that would strengthen bloodlines and political ties. The very idea of it made my wolf whimper in distress, though I couldn't understand why. For 3 days, our pack prepared frantically. The great ceremonial hall was decorated with silver and midnight blue banners. Flowers were arranged, tables set, and every surface polished until it gleamed. As Omegas, Lucy and I were assigned to serve during the ceremony, invisible helpers ensuring everything ran smoothly. But on the morning of the ceremony, everything started going wrong. I found Lucy crying in the storage pantry, her uniform torn at the shoulder and fingerprint bruises already forming on her pale arms. "Lucy, what happened?" I knelt beside her, my hands shaking with rage as I took in her disheveled appearance. Beta Marcus," she whispered, her voice broken. He said since the Alpha King was here, security would be too busy to notice if we... She couldn't finish the sentence, but she didn't need to. My vision went red. "Did he hurt you? Did he—" "No," she said quickly. "I got away. But Elena, he said he'd find me after the ceremony. He said no one would believe in Omega over a Beta, and that I should just make it easy on myself." Something snapped inside me in that moment. For 8 years I'd kept my head down, accepted my place, swallowed every injustice and humiliation. But watching this sweet girl break under the weight of a powerful man's twisted desires was the final straw. "No," I said firmly, helping her to her feet. "That's not going to happen." "But what can we do?" "He's right, Elena. Who's going to believe us?" That's when the insane idea started forming in my mind. In just a few hours, the most powerful alpha in North America would be in our ceremonial hall. If there was anyone who could put a stop to Marcus's abuse of power, it would be him. But how could a lowly Omega get the Alpha King's attention? The answer was both simple and terrifying. By doing something so shocking, so unprecedented, that he'd have to listen. The ceremony began at sunset, and the Great Hall was more magnificent than I'd ever seen it. Hundreds of wolves from packs across the territory had come to witness this historic event. The air thrummed with power and barely contained excitement. And then he entered. I'd seen pictures of Darius Blackthorne, but nothing had prepared me for the reality of his presence. He was tall, easily 6.5 feet, with broad shoulders that seemed to span for miles under his perfectly tailored black suit. His dark hair was swept back, revealing a face that could have been carved from marble by a master sculptor. But it was his eyes that stopped my breath in my throat. Steel gray and so intense they seemed to see straight through to your soul. Power radiated from him like heat from a forge. Every wolf in the hall, Alpha, Beta, and Omega alike, automatically bowed their heads in submission as he passed. Every wolf except me. I don't know what possessed me to keep watching him. Maybe it was the way his jaw was set in a hard line, like he was enduring this ceremony rather than celebrating it. Maybe it was the flash of something that looked almost like loneliness in those piercing eyes. Whatever it was, I couldn't look away. And that's when our eyes met across the crowded hall. The moment our gazes locked, something electric shot through me. My wolf, who had always been quiet and subdued, suddenly surged to attention with the intensity that left me breathless. The silver serving tray in my hands began to tremble. Darius had gone completely still, his nostrils flaring slightly as his eyes narrowed on me. For a heartbeat that felt like an eternity, the rest of the world faded away. Then someone bumped into me, breaking the spell, and I hurried back to my serving duties with my heart pounding like a drum. The ceremony proceeded with all the pomp and circumstance you'd expect. Pack alphas gave speeches about honor and tradition. The eligible females from prominent families were presented like prize livestock, each one more beautiful and accomplished than the last. And through it all I kept catching Darius looking at me, not at the gorgeous alpha daughters in their designer gowns, not at the carefully coiffed beta females batting their eyelashes in his direction. At me, the nobody Omega in a plain black servant's uniform. It was during the formal presentation of potential mates that I saw Marcus making his move. While everyone's attention was focused on the ceremony, he was sliding along the wall toward where Lucy stood with the other serving staff. She'd gone pale as snow, her hands shaking so badly she could barely hold her tray. I watched in horror as Marcus cornered her behind one of the massive stone pillars that supported the hall's vaulted ceiling. His hand was on her arm, squeezing tight enough to make her wince, his mouth at her ear whispering something that made her eyes fill with tears. That's when I made my decision. I set down my serving tray and walked straight across that ceremonial hall, past hundreds of powerful wolves, past alphas who could crush me with a thought, right up to where Darius Blackthorne stood on the raised dais. The crowd began to murmur as they noticed the crazy Omega marching toward their Alpha King. Voices rose in shock and outrage. "What is she doing? Someone stop her! How dare she interrupt the ceremony?" But I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. Lucy's terrified face was burned into my mind, and I knew this might be her only chance for justice. I climbed the steps to the dais, my heart hammering so hard I was sure everyone could hear it. Darius watched me approach with an unreadable expression, his powerful frame tensing as if preparing for an attack. "Your Majesty," I said, my voice carrying clearly across the now silent hall. "I need to report a crime." The words hung in the air like a challenge. Someone in the crowd laughed, a sharp, disbelieving sound. "A crime?" Darius's voice was low and controlled, but I could hear the dangerous edge underneath. "You interrupt my mating ceremony to report a crime?" "Yes," I said, lifting my chin despite the fear coursing through my veins. "Beta Marcus Reed has been using his position to assault Omega females in this pack. Tonight, he threatened a 16-year-old girl, and I have reason to believe he'll follow through unless someone with real power stops him." The explosion of outraged voices was immediate. "Lies! Omega scum! How dare she make such accusations?" But loudest of all was Marcus himself, his face red with fury as he pushed through the crowd toward the dais. "This is outrageous," he bellowed. "I won't stand here and be slandered by some pathetic Omega seeking attention. Your Majesty, this female is clearly delusional. She should be punished for this disruption." That's when Darius did something that surprised everyone, including me. He held up one hand, and the entire hall fell silent instantly. "You say she's lying," he said to Marcus, his voice carrying easily across the space. "But I find it interesting that you immediately knew she was talking about you. She never mentioned your name." Marcus's face went even redder. That is, she was looking right at me." "Was she?" Darius stepped closer to me, so close I could smell his intoxicating scent, pine forests and thunderstorms with something uniquely male underneath. "Tell me, little Omega, do you have proof of these accusations?" My heart sank. Proof was exactly what I didn't have. It would be my word against a beta's, just like Marcus had said. But then I thought of Lucy's bruised arms, her torn uniform, her terror-filled eyes. "The proof is on Lucy Hartwell's arms," I said clearly. "Fingerprint bruises from where he grabbed her today. The proof is in her torn uniform. The proof is in the fact that 3 other Omegas have left this pack in the past 2 years, rather than report what he did to them." "More lies!" Marcus snarled. He'd reached the base of the dais now, his face twisted with rage. "Your Majesty, surely you won't take the word of an Omega nobody over a respected beta. This is exactly the kind of attention-seeking behavior That's enough," Darius said quietly, but his voice cut through Marcus's rant like a blade. He turned to one of his own guards, a massive alpha who'd accompanied him from the Northern Territories. "Bring the Hartwell girl forward. Now." Within minutes, a terrified Lucy was escorted to the front of the hall. She kept her eyes fixed on the floor, her whole body shaking. "Show them your arms," I said gently. With trembling hands, Lucy pushed up her sleeves, revealing the dark bruises that marked her pale skin. A collective intake of breath swept through the crowd. "How did you get those marks?" Darius asked, his voice surprisingly gentle when addressing Lucy. I can't, please, Your Majesty. I don't want any trouble." "You're already in trouble, little one," he said. "The only question is whether you'll be in more trouble for lying to your Alpha King, or less trouble for telling the truth. Choose wisely." Lucy's eyes darted to Marcus, who was glaring at her with undisguised menace, then to me. I nodded encouragingly. "Beta Marcus grabbed me," she whispered. "This morning. He said things, bad things. And he said he'd find me after the ceremony." The hall erupted in shocked murmurs. Marcus's face had gone from red to purple. "She's lying," he roared. "Your Majesty, you can't possibly believe these fabricated accusations. I've served this pack faithfully for 15 years. I would never bring forward the other Omegas who've left the pack," Darius commanded. "All of them. I want them found and brought here within the hour." Our pack's alpha shifted uncomfortably. "Your Majesty, that might not be possible. They've scattered to different territories? Then bring me their exit reports. Bring me documentation of why they left. Now." I watched in amazement as the most powerful alpha in North America took my accusations seriously. He wasn't dismissing me because of my rank. He wasn't sweeping this under the rug to avoid embarrassment. He was actually investigating. Marcus seemed to realize he was losing ground. His expression shifted from outrage to calculation. "Your Majesty," he said, his voice taking on a conciliatory tone, "even if there were some misunderstandings with certain Omegas, surely this isn't the time or place for such discussions. This is your mating ceremony. Don't let this nobody ruin your special day." He gestured dismissively at me, and that's when something inside me snapped completely. "Nobody?" I stepped forward, my hands clenched into fists. "You think because I'm an Omega, because I don't have an important family name or a prestigious position, that makes me nobody? That makes Lucy nobody? That makes all your victims nobody?" "You are nobody," Marcus snarled, dropping all pretense of civility. "You're pack trash, just like that little bitch you're trying to protect. You exist to serve your betters, not make demands of—" The slap echoed through the great hall, like a gunshot. I hadn't planned it. 1 second Marcus was spewing his venomous words, and the next my palm was stinging and his head was snapped to the side from the force of the blow. But I'd miscalculated in my fury. Instead of slapping Marcus, I'd somehow hit Darius, who had stepped between us at the exact wrong moment. The silence that followed was deafening. Every eye in the hall was fixed on me with expressions of horror, shock, and disbelief. I'd just struck the Alpha King. I'd committed an act of treason that would normally result in immediate execution. "Oh God," I whispered, my hand flying to my mouth. "Your Majesty, I didn't mean, I was aiming for—" But then he smiled. "Finally," Darius said, his steel-gray eyes bright with something that looked like admiration. "Someone with fire." Before I could process what was happening, he'd closed the distance between us. One powerful hand cupped my face, his thumb tracing gently over my cheekbone. "What's your name?" he asked softly. "Elena," I managed to whisper. "Elena Winters." "Elena," he repeated, like he was tasting the syllables. "Do you know what you are to me, Elena Winters?" I shook my head, not trusting my voice. "You're my mate," he said simply. "My fated mate. The one I've been searching for my entire adult life." The hall exploded into chaos. Voices rose in shock, disbelief, and excitement. "Impossible! An Omega? The Alpha King's mate?" But I barely heard them. All I could focus on was Darius, on the way he was looking at me like I was the most precious thing he'd ever seen. "That's not possible," I breathed. "I'm nobody. I'm just an Omega." "You," he said firmly, "are the bravest woman I've ever met. You risked everything to protect someone who couldn't protect herself. You stood up to injustice even when you had no power. You faced down an Alpha King to demand justice for a child. If that doesn't make you worthy of being a queen, I don't know what does. But the mate bond, I don't feel—" "Look me in the eyes," he commanded gently. "Really look." I did as he asked, meeting that intense steel-gray gaze fully for the first time. The moment our eyes locked, it hit me like lightning. The bond I'd been too scared and overwhelmed to recognize before blazed to life between us, golden and unbreakable. My wolf sang with joy, finally recognizing her mate. "There she is," Darius murmured, his other hand coming up to frame my face. "My fierce little mate." "This is outrageous!" The voice cut through our moment like a blade. Marcus was back on his feet, his face twisted with fury and disbelief. "Your Majesty, you cannot possibly be serious. She's an Omega nobody. This has to be some kind of mistake." Darius's expression went ice cold as he turned to face Marcus, though his hands remained gentle on my face. "The only mistake," he said in a voice that could freeze hellfire, "is that you've been allowed to prey on innocent females for this long. Guards, arrest this man for assault, abuse of power, and threatening the mate of the Alpha King." "You can't do this!" Marcus struggled as 2 massive guards seized his arms. "I'm a beta! I have rights! I demand a trial!" "You'll get a trial," Darius said calmly. In my territory, under my laws, where the testimony of Omegas carries the same weight as the testimony of Alphas. I think you'll find the experience educational. As Marcus was dragged away, still protesting his innocence, Darius turned back to me. Now then, he said, his voice warming considerably, where were we? You were about to explain how this is possible, I said, still reeling from everything that had happened. I mean, I'm honored, truly, but surely there's been some mistake. Alpha Kings don't mate with Omega servants. This Alpha King does, he said firmly. Do you want to know how I knew, even before the bond snapped into place? I nodded, not trusting my voice. Because you're the first person in 35 years who's looked at me and seen something worth risking everything for. Not my power, not my title, not what I could give them. You saw injustice happening and decided I might be someone worth appealing to for help. Do you have any idea how rare that is? I thought about it. He was right. I hadn't approached him as the terrifying Alpha King everyone whispered about. I'd approached him as someone I hoped might help a frightened girl. But what about your ceremony? I asked. All these important families came here expecting you to choose a political mate. Let me worry about politics, he said. The only choice I want to make is this. Elena Winters, will you accept me as your mate? Will you let me spend the rest of my life protecting you, the way you protected Lucy today? The crowd held its collective breath as they waited for my answer. I looked around the great hall, at the faces watching us with expressions ranging from shock to delight to barely concealed envy. Then I looked at Lucy, who was smiling through her tears and nodding encouragingly. Finally, I looked back at Darius, this powerful, incredible man who was looking at me like I hung the moon. Yes, I said simply. Yes. I'll accept you. The roar of approval from the crowd was deafening, but I barely heard it. Darius had pulled me into his arms, his mouth claiming mine in a kiss that seared straight through to my soul. When we finally broke apart, both breathless, he rested his forehead against mine. I should probably mention, he said with a grin that transformed his stern features, that slapping me at our mating ceremony is going to make one hell of a story for our grandchildren. I laughed, the sound bubbling up from somewhere deep inside me, somewhere that had been locked away for so long, I'd forgotten it existed. Just promise me one thing, I said. Anything. Promise me that in your territory, Omegas are protected, that girls like Lucy don't have to be afraid. His expression grew serious. Elena, in our territory, strength isn't measured by the Greek letter assigned to you at birth. It's measured by your actions, your character, your courage. And by that measure, you're the strongest wolf I've ever met. He turned to address the crowd, his arm still wrapped protectively around my waist. Let this be a lesson to every pack in the Northern Territories. His voice boomed across the hall. Power without justice is tyranny. Strength without protection of the innocent is weakness. And anyone who thinks they can abuse those under their authority will answer to me personally. The crowd roared its approval again, and I felt something I'd never experienced before. The feeling of being truly protected, truly valued. Later that evening, after the impromptu celebration, because apparently discovering your fated mate at your political mating ceremony called for an immediate change of plans, Darius and I found ourselves alone on the terrace overlooking the Packlands. Do you regret it? I asked quietly. Giving up the chance for a political alliance? He pulled me closer against his side, his warmth chasing away the evening chill. Elena, I've spent 15 years making political alliances. I've built the strongest territory in North America through strategy and compromise and carefully calculated moves. But do you know what I never had? What? A partner. Someone who would challenge me when I'm wrong, support me when I'm right, and slap sense into me when I need it, he chuckled. Literally, apparently. I blushed, remembering my moment of fury. I really am sorry about that. I was aiming for Marcus. Don't be sorry. That slap woke something up in me that I didn't even know was sleeping. For the first time in my life, someone treated me like a person instead of a title. Someone expected me to do the right thing just because it was right. not because it benefited me politically. We stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. What happens now? I asked. Now we go home to the Northern Territories. You'll be crowned as my queen and mate. We'll build a life together, a family, if the moon goddess wills it, and we'll make sure that what happened to Lucy never happens to another Omega under our protection. It won't be easy, I warned. I don't know the first thing about being a queen. I can't do politics or diplomacy or any of the things alpha females are trained for. Elena, he said, turning me to face him, you stood up to an entire room full of alphas and betas to protect one terrified girl. You risked your life to demand justice from the most powerful wolf in North America. If that's not queen material, I don't know what is. He kissed me again, soft and sweet this time, full of promise and hope. Besides, he murmured against my lips, something tells me the Northern Territories could use a queen who's not afraid to slap some sense into people when they need it. I laughed, and the sound carried across the night air like music. 6 months later, I stood in the great hall of the Northern Territory Castle, wearing a crown that had belonged to Alpha Queens for 3 centuries. But I wasn't thinking about the weight of the crown, or the hundreds of pack leaders who had come to witness my coronation. I was thinking about the new laws we'd implemented protecting Omegas across all our territories. I was thinking about Lucy, who was now studying at the finest school in our lands, her future bright with possibility. I was thinking about the other young women who no longer had to fear those in power above them. "What are you thinking about, my fierce little queen?" Darius murmured in my ear as we danced at the coronation celebration. "Justice," I said simply, "and how sometimes it takes something as simple as a slap to wake people up." He threw back his head and laughed, the sound rich and warm. "Remind me never to get on your bad side," he said. "Too late for that," I replied with a grin. "You're stuck with me now." "Thank the moon goddess for that," he said, spinning me around the dance floor. "Thank the moon goddess for brave little Omegas who aren't afraid to slap sense into stubborn alpha kings." As he held me close, swaying to the music under the glittering chandeliers, I marveled at how much my life had changed. 6 months ago, I was nobody. Invisible, powerless, forgotten. Now I was Elena Blackthorne, Queen of the Northern Territories, mate to the most powerful alpha in North America. But more importantly, I was proof that sometimes the most unlikely people can change everything. Sometimes all it takes is someone brave enough to stand up and demand better. Sometimes all it takes is someone with enough fire to slap an alpha king and change the world.